Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, breaking down the Wolves Pelicans game on Wednesday, what the Wolves did well, why I don't think this was a bad loss, and why I don't think we need to play the let's not do the silver linings thing game quite yet this season. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about individual studs and duds and what the Wolves need to take from this game moving forward. It's all coming to the show. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Thursday evening, Friday morning. This is the post-game podcast from Wednesday night's Wolves Pelicans game due to an unusual travel schedule. This podcast is publishing. This episode is publishing later on Thursday. So Friday's episode will publish kind of midday, getting you ready for Friday night's game. And some additional takeaways on that podcast from, kind of this stretch of the Wolves schedule, what we're looking for moving forward. But this is the post-game podcast, kind of, going through Wolves Pelicans on Wednesday. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as your favorite audio platforms. And you can also watch the show on Locked On Sports Minnesota. That's both the Roku and Amazon Fire TV app. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken, with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. Okay, so the Wolves lost the Pelicans by a single point on Wednesday. And, this is a really good Pelicans team, right? They've been at 500 or above all season. They had Zion Williamson healthy. Obviously, still no Brandon Ingram. But, Williamson on the floor, CJ McCollum on the floor. It's a balanced team. They do a lot of things well. We talked about this previewing the game on Wednesday's episode, that this is just a really good offensive rebounding team. That was going to be an issue for the Wolves. It's a team that doesn't take a ton of threes, but makes them when they do. All of those things came true in this game at really important moments. And that's kind of my biggest takeaway is the Pelicans are exactly who we thought they were going into this game. The Wolves played fairly well overall and still only lost by a point, despite a lot of breaks going against them. And Marty Gellner and I talked about this on the post-game podcast, the live postcast late Wednesday. And I thought the Wolves, there's a couple things here, right? I completely understand not wanting to play the moral victory game, the silver lining game with a team that mortgaged their future to acquire an all-NBA player who's not playing up to snuff. He's now 30 years old. The future has certainly been mortgaged in terms of first-round selections. Anthony Edwards has not taken that Ja Morant-esque third-year leap to this point. There's a lot that's been underwhelming about the season so far, and I'm not at all running from that. If you listen to this podcast regularly, we talk about that a lot. They're 3 games under 500 now after this game, I believe. 16 and 19. So absolutely, it's disappointing. There's no doubt about that. I thought they'd be 4 or 5 games above 500 at this point, not 3 games below 500. However, there's no shame in this loss to this Pelicans team with Zion Williamson on the floor. And in a game where the Wolves took what has to be one of the Pelicans' best punches, and literally Zion's career high in scoring in a single game. And we're in this game down to the final possession. And if Ant's buzzer beating attempt drops, they win this game. And we're talking about how awesome it is that they won this game, right? That's literally it's not like this was even a multi-possession game that they were kind of in it, kind of not, went down to the final couple minutes, but you'd see the writing on the wall. This was if that buzzer beater bounces in instead of out, or if, and I'm going to run through a few things here, had gone slightly differently, this is a Wolves win. And this complete, I get that you could do that with many NBA games, right? 80%, 70% of Wolves games over the course of the season, you could say, this kind of hinged on a couple of possessions, but this very literally, it was a 1-point game. And I promise you this conversation, the tenor of the conversation surrounding the Wolves today, heading into Friday night's game against Milwaukee, and the post-game reaction to Wolves Pelicans would be completely different had some of these things gone the other way. And that doesn't change the fact that many things still didn't go well for the Wolves, and they need to improve in a ton of areas. And we'll get to that too. And we always do on the show. I think it's important to point out there were a lot of kind of literal bounces and figurative bounces that went away from the Wolves, right? So the buzzer beater, for instance, the buzzer beating attempt by Anthony Edwards, that easily could have bounced in. That's one. Um, and like, I mean, I don't know. You talk about some of the missed bunnies at the rim. There were some of those in this game for the Wolves. The Austin Rivers foul on the CJ McCollum 3 with the kick out was kind of crazy. I don't want to get too much into that because I don't want to straight like I don't want this to turn into an officiating rant because I don't think it was awful. I think the Wolves, there were some tough ones in this game. But so I want to point that one out because that was frustrating to say the least. The Rivers foul on McCollum instead of the offensive foul that had initially been called. This is a team that, you know, sees Karl-Anthony Towns get called for it all the time. The missed call on Zion elbowing Gobert in the face down the stretch in this game. And that was something that apparently it looked like the official was describing it as like they saw it, but it was a natural motion, which I don't know. I don't know how many times I've watched NBA games over the last just couple of years, really, where they call all sorts of contact to the head, whether or not it's a natural motion. We've seen guys attempt layups. I forget who it was. I think it was Ant last season was called for a flagrant foul on a knee to the midsection or below the belt, really, I think, on an opposing defender on a layup attempt, which literally is how you teach fundamentally to shoot a layup. And he was called for an offensive foul, incidental or not, even if it's a natural shot. But then in this situation, it's a natural motion when the elbow hits somebody in the face. And, you know, like hard, like there wasn't a flop necessary. And this is a situation where flopping and selling things, which Gobert has a tendency to do, he's far from the only one to do it, can hurt you, right? Because officials are like, it may not have been that bad. It should have been an offensive foul. I mean, we see calls for a lot less, like the incidental, you know, finger to the eye, like that happens all the time where guys' limbs are going everywhere and it's completely incidental. And the Zion elbow to the face, incidental or not, was an elbow to the face and should have been at the very least a foul. If not, we've seen weirdly that be called a technical before, which I've never understood. But I promise you, we've seen that called a technical on Towns, for instance, in the past. So that was a big miss, I think, by the officials. And we can also talk about the 6 technicals and flagrant called on Minnesota. And, you know, there were a few technicals on the Pelicans too. And I think there were 2 illegal defenses. Man, it's like I'm living in the 90s. Defensive 3-second calls on the Timberwolves. And I think both on D'Angelo Russell, there was, you know, delay of game calls, like just a weird, like a point here and there, a possession here and there really adds up. And I think sometimes we lose track of that because there is so much back and forth and there's a lot of thrown away possessions in an NBA game. And like, if we're going to completely oversimplify things, NBA games boil down to the teams that give away the least possessions, right? These guys are all pro basketball players. They can make shots at a decent enough clip. They can defend, you know, they can do all that. They can all do virtually the same stuff, but which teams are best coached and best executing the coach's game plan? You know, a good coach that has a good game plan that's then executed properly by the team. Those are the teams that win. And it's why, like, the Wolves last year were really good defensively for so much of the season. And the well-coached teams were like, okay, we can beat this blitzing defense with a skip pass here and a well-timed cut there. Those are the teams that, like, the cream rises, right, towards the end of the season and in the playoffs. And this isn't like me saying Chris Finch isn't a good coach. It's me saying the Wolves are not currently executing, and that reflects poorly on the coach as well as the team. And over the course of a game and a season, it's the teams that throw away the least amount of possessions, as weird as and kind of depressing as that sounds when it comes to like the good and the bad basketball teams. Like, that's what this is, right? And a few of those random points, and D'Lo is culprit number 1 when it comes to, like, you know, the mimicking the free throw delay of game technical thing, the multiple defensive 3-second calls on D'Lo. And you watch those back and he's just wandering around the paint with no purpose for 4.5, 5 seconds before he gets called for the defensive 3-second. The thrown away possession with the intercepted pass from Zion Williamson. Like, these things that seem, well, that one didn't seem small in the moment, but some of them seem small. They really add up. And D'Lo's not the only guy to have these issues. In this particular game, those were basically all D'Lo's fault, right? So all that to say, the Wolves played well. I'm not going to say they deserve to win, but I don't think they necessarily deserve to lose, other than a couple of those, like the D'Lo throw in the pass away. You know, some of those things. We'll talk a little more about the officiating. You know, it's just one of those that could have gone either way. And it just is magnified when it's a team that's already struggling, had lost 3 straight, and is now 3 under 500. They lost to a Western Conference rival in the Pelicans. It seems that much bigger now because of the position the Wolves are in. But if they'd come out on top, we would be talking about how great a win this was for the Timberwolves and how timely it was during this difficult stretch in the schedule. I do want to get into some of the details, some of the things Marty and I touched on in the live postcast on Wednesday. So we're going to do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Rocket Money. Say goodbye to last year's outdated, disorganized methods of managing your money and say hello to Rocket Money, the better way to hack your finances in 2023. Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill, is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. Over 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about, like that streaming service you bought just to watch one show or that free trial that you never even used. Rocket Money will quickly and easily identify your subscriptions for you so you can stop paying for the ones you don't want. Rocket Money makes canceling subscriptions as easy as a click of a button. Simply find the subscription you don't want and press cancel. And Rocket Money will cancel it for you. No more long hold times with customer service or tedious emailing back and forth. Over 3 million people have used Rocket Money, saving the average person up to $720 a year. I moved just a couple of months ago. We had some subscriptions that I just kind of let fall by the wayside. Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill, is the perfect way to get rid of some of those that maybe you kind of forgot about or just don't want to sit there again on hold and wait for them to get canceled. Stop throwing your money away. Cancel unwanted subscriptions and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. That's rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Now make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today, the biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's talk about a few additional key takeaways from Wolves Pelicans. I talked about this with Marnie, but I thought Jaden McDaniels was the Wolves' best all-around player. Anthony Edwards had a really good game. I thought generally performed well, but I thought Jaden McDaniels was the Wolves' best player. Defensively in the first half, he held Zion to just 10 points. And of course, Williamson ends with 43, career high, 33 in the second half. First half, McDaniels was outstanding. Got into a little bit of foul trouble, and that's partly what impacted down the stretch. He had to be a little more careful in the second half, and Zion definitely got his share of calls in this game. Plus, the Wolves had to use Ant on Zion. They had to try some different things. They were switching a bit. But in the first half, McDaniels was outstanding. Pickpocketed Zion at one point, played well, even as slight as McDaniels is, and he's put on a bit of bulk in the past couple of years. He was rail thin when he came to the league. And Zion, of course, with the Shaq-like way he plays, is like Shaq on the perimeter, right? I thought Jaden did a really good job. And this is another thing Marnie and I really dug into this, is this was a do stuff game for Jaden McDaniels. We don't see him stuffing stat sheets very often. And this wasn't in a traditional triple double sort of, Luka Doncic, old school Russell Westbrook sort of way. This was, relative to Jaden McDaniels, what he usually gives the Wolves. This was stuffing the stat sheet, 19.7 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, and a block in this game for McDaniels, 8 of 12 shooting. He added, a couple free throws, one made 3 in this game, and was that was in 34 minutes, was a +2 in those 34 minutes, and did commit those 5 fouls. He also had no turnovers in this game. And not that McDaniels typically has many turnover issues. He doesn't handle the ball a ton in the half court or initiate offense, but still 19, 7, 3, 2, and 1 with what is 8 of 12, 75% shooting. That's bad math. 67% shooting from the field. This is a really, 50% from 3, 1 of 2, 67% from the field, got to the line 3 times. That's stuff in the stat sheet when it comes to Jay McDaniels. And he was fantastic on both ends of the floor. I thought he was the Wolves' best all-around player. Let's talk a little bit about D'Lo. D'Lo had 27, 4, and 3 in this game and had those issues down the stretch. Had the bad turnover with about 45 seconds left. Then the Wolves come down, Ant gets the dunk, they tie the game, and then he gives up that offensive rebound in the final seconds. The Wolves had the final 20 seconds or so. The Wolves got the initial stop on the Pelicans, a tough 3-point attempt from New Orleans. They miss it, and Russell does not box out Dyson Daniels, or really he kind of glances over his shoulder at him on the left baseline and like token puts his hands out the field where he is, but Russell doesn't box out and he doesn't go up for the ball. He just stands there. And that, you see D'Lo do that over the course of a game all the time. You can get away with a lot of NBA players do it over the course of the game all the time, right? But in the final, what should have been the final Pelicans offensive possession, the Wolves should get the ball, call timeout with a chance to win it or allow it to go to overtime by missing. There should not have been a new possession for the Pelicans. D'Angelo Russell has to do a better job, and I'm not asking him to box out on every possession. I'm not asking him to be physical, to try and rebound at every possession. He can get away with not doing that all the time. But in a tie game with 20 seconds left or whatever was left, and in crunch time, you have to show an effort to put a body on someone and or go for the basketball. Like, when you're learning to play basketball, you learn like, hey, box out, don't go for the ball. Because if you box out, you can still get the ball, right? The coach actually boxing somebody out, letting the ball bounce, and then still getting the rebound. That's the demonstration that I was given in high school, right, or in middle school, whatever. That's what boxing out does in theory. Guys don't box out by and large in the NBA. It's just part of whatever. And a lot of these guys were athletic enough to not have to do it in college and in high school, so they don't do it in the NBA. So you don't have to you just go for the ball, right? Because that's usually what everyone does is they just go for the ball. You're barely ever putting a body on somebody at the NBA level. You're just going for the ball. Do one or the other. And maybe you don't get it because D'Angelo Russell's not ultra athletic or, any of that, but he should be able to contest Dyson Daniels for a rebound given Russell's size. And, it just was a very frustrating final minute for me when it comes to D'Angelo Russell. That was disappointing to watch in this game. We talked about the technicals and the flagrant. And I talked a little bit about how the Pelicans did what they do in that they didn't take a ton of threes, but when they took them, they made them. They were 27th in the league coming into the game in 3-point rate, 13th in 3-point percentage. And sure enough, they only took 23 threes in this game compared to the Wolves 29, but they made 11 of them. So they shot 47.8% from three, effectively 48% from deep. They also got to the line a ton, which I was worried about. They got to the line 43 times, and they actually missed 13 free throws. So on the one hand, this could have been worse for the Wolves if the Pelicans had just simply made more free throws. They were a shade under 70% from the free throw line, but they got 43 free throw attempts in this game, which is another thing I was worried about. And the Wolves didn't, get completely blown out in the rebounding category. They were -8 overall. They did give up 9 offensive rebounds to the Pelicans, which, pales in comparison to some of the offensive rebound totals that Wolves opponents have had recently and really all season. They were inopportune when it comes, if you're looking at it from the Wolves perspective, or very opportune from the Pelicans perspective. Like you look at the offensive rebound we just talked about, right? That Dyson Daniels kicked it back out. The Pelicans, Zion ultimately scores and gets fouled and he gets the free throw that put the Pelicans ahead because of that second chance opportunity generated by the offensive rebound the Wolves allowed. So those inopportune moments to fail on the glass, that's the Pelicans shot the ball well from three on relatively limited attempts. They got to the line. They got opportune offensive rebounds. And for all those reasons is really why they won this game. They did the things they do well. And the Wolves did enough things. You made enough of these mistakes that really add up. The sloppy, again, the Wolves. So on the flip side of that, right, the Pelicans didn't get a ton of offensive rebounds in this game, but they got that big one down the stretch. The Wolves only turned it over 11 times, but they turned it over twice in 3 possessions in the final minutes, including that miserable D'Angelo Russell pass to Jaden McDaniels that was telegraphed and picked off by Zion Williamson. And we could debate whether or not that was a foul on Zion. I don't really think it was. I mean, it could have been called, but I wasn't too upset that they didn't call it. Obviously, I would have preferred that they did, but from a purely objective perspective, it could have gone either way, right? And I guess recording this, I should have looked at the 2-minute. I'm recording this late enough that the last 2-minute report should be out, but I don't think they necessarily needed to call a foul on that play. That was a good play by Zion, a terrible pass from D'Lo. He should have telegraphed that pass regardless, right? So the turnover thing for the Wolves, they did okay in this game. They only turned it over 11 times, which was twice less than the Pelicans. The Pels turned it over 13 times. So they won in that category. They shot the ball greater than 50% from the field. They were okay on points in the paint. They got to the line 32 times themselves, but it was the inopportune turnovers, the technicals that added up, the inopportune offensive rebound for the Pelicans that led to the game-winning, the go-ahead free throw, the Pelicans 3-point shooting. All those things They did well. The Wolves just fell short and had those opportunities, which is what happens in a 1-point game, right? In a crunch time situation, you have to make the plays when they matter the most. And that's, as cliche as that is, that's exactly what happened in this game. All right, let's close with individual studs and duds. We'll hit that here quickly to close the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is also brought to us by our friends at the NHTSA. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. But no, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, you kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, let's close today's show by talking individual studs and duds. I already talked about Jaden McDaniels. He has to be number one for me in this game. Real quick, 19 points on 12 shots, which is as efficient as Jaden McDaniels is likely to get. 1 of 2 outside the arc. You don't want him to shoot the ball. Yeah, like in a perfect world, he becomes a better three-point shooter, obviously, and he becomes like a 3-and-D type guy that can shoot more threes, a higher volume. But as he has been through the first 2.5 seasons of his career, you don't want him shooting more than 2 or 3 threes a game. So 12 shots, 2 of them being threes is a good mix. He took the ball to the basket a couple times, really looked confident and comfortable and active. We don't always see this active of a Jaden McDaniels. And lo and behold, he gets 7 rebounds, including 3 offensive rebounds. It was just, was it Wednesday's show? Tuesday's show, maybe? Or Monday's show? Earlier this week, I talked about the Wolves' rebounding issues and how McDaniels is the number one culprit. It may have actually been all the way to last Friday. Number one culprit for the Wolves in terms of falling short in rebounding, especially defensive rebounding. And 3 of his 7 rebounds were offensive in this game. But he's got to step it up. And he did that in this game. The activity level was the biggest thing, both with the ball in his hands on offense and also when it comes to loose balls, offensive rebound opportunities. Again, 19 and 7 on 12 shots, those 19 points, 3 assists, 2 steals, and a block, no turnovers. A little bit of foul trouble that hurt the Wolves down the stretch because they had to be careful with him. But, it's as much as I talk about McDaniels has to improve there too, obviously. I don't know. You're playing Zion Williamson. Of course you're going to get into foul trouble. That's how this works. But a good game for Jaden McDaniels. Really good game. Because I'm picking 3 studs, we have to also pick Anthony Edwards. I thought his game was good overall. He went toe-to-toe Zion for a while. I don't think this was an outstanding game by any stretch for Anthony Edwards, but him going toe-to-toe with Zion, third and fourth quarter, really, kind of mid-late third quarter and then mid-late fourth quarter was great. I think he should have shot the ball a bit more in the fourth. The Wolves should have gotten him the ball a bit more in advantageous spots to try and score. But he still played 39 minutes, had 27 points on 23 shot attempts, 2 of 6 outside the arc, just 5 and 9 at the line. The 9 attempts are good, but he's got to make more than 5 and 9 at the line. 6 rebounds, good, 2 steals, 2 assists. He did have 4 turnovers. There were some moments that weren't great for Ant, but I thought overall this was a good game for him. And I think you got to be happy with it overall. My third stud in this game, I think I'm going to go Jalen Noel. You could also make an argument for Naz Reid. I'll go Noel because he was on the floor in crunch time, and Austin Rivers had fouled out. Noel was on the floor. He had a couple of really nice possessions, pick and roll game with Rudy Gobert, and Rudy had a meh game. He had 10 and 8, 4 or 5 shooting. I believe 2 of those 4 buckets were in the fourth quarter, courtesy of Jalen Noel. I believe both of Noel's assists were to him, were to Rudy. And we haven't seen a ton of Noel and Gobert minutes. I want to dive a bit into that pairing and see, what that could look like moving forward. But I think that there could be some chemistry there. Noel's becoming a better passer, seeing the floor better, been asked to initiate a bit more over the past season and a half or so. Or really I guess dating back to about this time last year when the Wolves had some injuries at point guard. But this was a good Noel game, and it's been a bit more of a roller coaster of late with Noel. He had 14 points on 5 of 11 shooting, 2 of 4 on threes, a perfect 2 of 2 at the line, plus 2 rebounds, 2 assists, no turnovers for Noel in 25 minutes. I should also say Naz had a great game, 13 and 6, 5 of 8 shooting 2 of 5 from 3. Was great in the first half. Saw some extended minutes with Rudy Gobert, and I have talked about this all week on the podcast. I think we'll see more of those minutes with those two together, and I think we should. I think we need to. With Karl-Anthony Towns out, you got to play your best players. And right now, Naz Reid's one of your best 6 players. He just is. He's, like Nate Knight had a brief stint in this game. No Matt Ryan. We did see 13 minutes of Bryn Forbes, and, it was kind of the same that we've unfortunately grown accustomed to with him. So, like, hey, now he's automatically in your top 7, assuming he's ahead of Knight and Forbes in your rotation. So, it's kind of Naz and it's Noel. And if Rudy's still one of your top 6 players, which he better be, like, you got to find a way to play those guys together more frequently and have some success. So a good game for Naz. Duds in this game. This is, I don't know. I don't want to give Rudy a dud. I don't know that that's fair after this one, but the 5 shot attempts, he was in foul trouble. He fouled out in just 29 minutes. 5 shot attempts isn't enough for him. And most of the time with Gobert, it's not his fault because somebody's got to get him the ball. He had that really good stretch in the first half where he had like 3 blocks in 10 minutes or something like that. Finished with 4 blocks, 10 points, 8 rebounds, 4 of 5 shooting, 2 assists, a couple of turnovers, and again, fouled out in 29 minutes. So a pretty middle of the road game for Rudy. It's some of the same issues we've seen recently, like just not getting open on the roll, the feel isn't quite there in the dunker spot with him. I shouldn't say feel. Rudy has good feel offensively. It's more the chemistry, the feel between Rudy and the Wolves guards. That's still an issue. I'll give a dud to Austin Rivers. He had a couple nice moments. The crazy kick out on the 3 isn't really his fault. 5 points on 2 of 6 shooting, just 1 of 4 on threes. It makes sense that he's coming back to earth now a little bit in 2 of the last 3 games after having that 4-game, that crazy stretch he was on. It was a -10. Actually, I picked him as a dud before I even looked at the plus minus because I think that can be very noisy, but that was the team's worst plus minus, a -10 in 33 minutes in a game they only lost by 1. Bryn Forbes wasn't great either, but 13 minutes, I don't know that he actively hurt the Wolves enough to be considered a dud, so I'll just stick with Austin Rivers in this one. But, the Wolves need more out of Rudy, and that's the risk of sounding like a broken record. We've talked extensively about that already on the show. Okay, on Friday, I want to preview Wolves-Bucks. We have not seen the Bucks. Did we see them earlier this year? I don't remember. Well, here, I'll check that really quick. After I said that, I realized that I think maybe we did see the Bucks already once. Yeah, we did. Wolves lost the Bucks way back on November 4th. So we'll dive into that on Friday, see what happened the last time these teams matched up. Milwaukee's lost 4 straight. So they could be seeing this as a get-right opportunity, just like last Friday, a week ago, the Boston Celtics said the same thing, I'm sure, going into that game against the Wolves. And sure enough, the Wolves helped the Celtics get right. So we'll preview that matchup against the Milwaukee Bucks, what to look for. We'll peek ahead at the schedule upcoming. So that'll be Friday's show, and then we'll do the live postcast with Barney Gellner, of course, on Locked On Sports Minnesota. And also we'll post it on the audio feed, so that'll be your Friday night getting you into Saturday. The Wolves also play on Saturday at home for the Pistons on the second night of a back-to-back. Perhaps that's a get right for Minnesota, depending on what happens Friday against Milwaukee. But of course, on a back-to-back and traveling in between, it's not the easiest task. But anyway, we'll talk about that on Friday's show. A big thank you again to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on Locked On Sports Minnesota. That's the app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. And one more reminder, just to be clear, there will be another show. If you're listening to this on Friday, I posted it late Thursday because of travel. We'll have another show posting on Friday, probably mid-late morning, previewing the weekend. We'll do both Friday nights preview against the Bucks and then also against the Pistons Saturday because we haven't seen the Pistons yet this year. So still a show coming Friday. If you're listening to this early Friday morning, there's another show later in the day. And then the live postcast tonight, following about 45 minutes after Wolves Bucks, we'll do the live postcast too. So please be sure to, subscribe to all the channels and everything. Pay attention to all that. And again, a big thank you for listening. And of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Podcast Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And a reminder, you can make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the sports world in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before everyone else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.